All right, welcome to Full Momentum and HEC-RAS Vodcast. Again, here on day 2 of ASFPM, the 2022 conference in Orlando, Florida. And we have another guest. We've had a ton of great guests today, Chris. It's been really fun today.
Well, what's really cool is all of the interesting presentations and amazing applications of HEC-RAS. And Ray here has a really cool application of HEC-RAS that we heard about, and then we started talking to you about it. So Ray Carell.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I knew I was going to mess it up.
It's a very traditionally Asian. I mean, I'm from Nepal, so.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm from the mountains. And
so Ray Carell is Ray Carell
Yes.
is a hydraulic engineer with wood, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do with wood on a day-to-day basis?
So, well, I'm going to go with before wood for a little bit.
Sure.
Because I was working on just PTS contract with FEMA on Region 10, which is Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. So I was doing mostly just production level work for FEMA.
Yeah.
South to the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, exactly. And then I lived there for 3 years, which I loved because it was a great place to live.
Where exactly did you live?
I lived in, so my office was in Linwood.
Okay.
And I lived in Shoreline and then moved to Edmonds after.
Oh, nice.
So just suburbs of Seattle.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah. And I loved going down to Bellingham, for conferences, and going down to Portland whenever I could. So I had a great time, and obviously great drinks and great mountains. I'm a mountain guy.
All the above.
From Nepal.
Yeah.
I love mountains and I love hiking. So it really suited to my lifestyle. But I grew up in Atlanta.
Okay.
So I went to Georgia Tech, grew up in Atlanta, so I had to come back home.
Yeah. Nice.
I couldn't leave home.
So on a day-to-day basis, what's your kind of role with wood from an engineering perspective?
Right. So I do hydraulics modeling. So I use a lot of RAS. I love doing statistical analysis in hydrology.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things. So my background is also in physics, so I love numbers.
Yeah.
I love anything that's sort of numerical. CFD modeling. I've always had an interest in computational fluid dynamics.
Nice.
Heck yeah.
So I love anything that has to do with hydraulics and hydrology, but I like the more statistical portion of hydrology better.
Yep.
And the 2D version of hydraulics better. So
nice.
Yeah.
So what's your CFD model of choice?
I've done ANSYS before.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, but this is when I was a physics major doing in a nonlinear dynamics lab.
Yeah.
Have you used Flow3D at all?
I have not used.
Okay.
I was in a presentation for Fluid 3D recently on LinkedIn. Someone sent me an invite, and I just attended it. It looks cool, but I love hydraulics. Yeah.
Me too. It's a lot of fun.
That's why we're having you on to talk today. So just to give you guys, everybody who's listening, a little bit of a background. So Chris and I were talking with actually our previous interviewees, and they said that their favorite presentation that they attended today was yours, Raheel. And
awesome.
What was really interesting to Chris and I is the fact that when they were describing what you had done with the HEC-RAS model, it sounded so similar to a project that we had done and that I actually presented on at USSD in 2021. And so we brought you over. We had a conversation about it, and it was just it was such a cool example of how you can have two smart RAS modelers that don't know each other, never work together, and they approach a difficult problem that RAS maybe doesn't have an easy solution to try to represent, and they come to the same conclusion that one works, and two is just I think it's just a great example of how customizable RAS is and how user friendly it is. So I'm going to let Chris. You want to jump in before?
I just wanted to say, isn't that the best part of HEC-RAS modeling, or just modeling in general, is when you come up with really creative ways to solve a problem, right? Yeah. So tell us how you came up with that, right?
Yeah, so I guess lay out the story if you can in terms of what the problem was, and then tell us about how you came up with it.
Of course. The way I kind of came up with this is just looking at karst. I had never worked with karst features. I've never really worked with sort of groundwater, surface water interaction before in my life.
And karst features are kind of complex groundwater features in Florida, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, they're everywhere. I'm actually working on one in Missouri as well. So any kind of every time you have sinkholes, your springs, you know, you have those kind of karst geomorphology.
Yep.
So I was working on this in Florida, inside sort of like north central Florida, and what happened is I was supposed to only be doing gauge analysis using 17C. It was like supposed to be this really simple project where you do the gauge analysis, give them the flows, and be done with it.
Yeah.
So, and then I noticed that, you know, they wanted 10% flow change per drainage area. So it was a 1D model.
Okay.
They wanted 10% flow change, and I was like, all right, I think I can do that. But then there was no dam or anything, no regulation, you know, but the flows were decreasing as they were going downstream.
Yeah.
Which is, again, red flag. Flows are decreasing. What's happening? What's happening in between? Then I discovered, I kind of like just opened this can of worms, just like, all right, coating scarp. There are these all these features that, you know, like attenuate flows, but then it doesn't really attenuate flows for low flows, but does it for high flows.
Right.
So I had to make that distinction by reading like minimum flow level papers that were published by other people in Florida. So I did a little bit of that and basically did duration analysis. I tried to make this very statistical, by the way, at first. I did not even think about using RAS 2D. What I tried to do was make it into this regression equation by doing like interstation correlation. So I was just trying to solve this by just doing.
Keep that mic up to your mouth.
Sorry, yeah.
He's getting so excited about this. I can tell.
So we love.
Yeah. So I was trying to do this like interstation correlation, and that's I was trying to solve this whole problem statistically.
Okay.
But again, it wasn't really possible to solve it statistically because we didn't really know what was going on with at different flow features.
And basically what you were explaining to me, which was so interesting, again, very unlike anything like we have in the Northwest, is more or less at low flow, you had a situation where a majority of the flow was being infiltrated into all the storage that's available underground. But at high flow, all of that storage seemed to go away. There wasn't any of that infiltration that was occurring anymore.
So there's a lot more attenuation in high flows. Yeah. So you have your underground features, I would say, groundwater features that are just holding those flow the minute it gets above ground. So your point of zero flow is what you look at. So the minute your river stage goes over the point of zero flow, it starts attenuating.
Okay.
So for a flood model, which it's always to do with high flows, we are attenuating every single, like from 10-year to 100-year storm, we were attenuating
more and more attenuation.
More attenuation.
Wow. Okay.
So, but the thing is, I didn't really see a pattern where going from 10-year to 100-year, I saw more attenuation. It was more like for high flow, just the flow regime. There was attenuation.
Wow.
So you had this issue. You identified what was going on. You decided statistically it wasn't going to be something you could solve. So what was the solution that you came up with?
So the solution was obviously to get the water out. So we needed to get some of that water out of the, to sort of do the mass balance, in general. So I started with turning Manning's knob, like every hydraulics engineer would do, and then tried CN Valley. It's just everything.
A calibration nightmare when you're losing water, right?
Yeah. So I tried that, and also did like the vertical. I saw one of the videos. Cray, was it? Yeah. So I saw that
vertical variation of Manning's Valley.
Vertical variation of Manning's.
So shouts to Cray Price.
Yeah. Shout out. So I was like, maybe if we try to get some of the vertical variation in Manning's, we can calibrate, but there's just no way. These are karst features. You have to take water out in like bulk. So I went and put in internal boundary conditions and used negative hydrographs.
Nice.
So those negative hydrographs were, we got like the base groundwater flow to start with, and then we saw obviously some sinks take in more water than the other sinks. So we had to at least understand which sinks were more important and which weren't. So we started at a value that was out of one of the published papers that I saw. We started at a value and then kept on turning the knob until we could fit all the gauges, because these gauges have 89 to 90 years of record. So they're not like gauges that are just like 15 years of record.
They're solid.
They're solid.
Yeah, they're solid.
So I could completely rely on them and just basically use these gauges as calibration, basically calibrate to these gauges.
Right.
So I know exactly how much water is coming out.
Nice.
And using negative hydrograph in 2D model, that's probably the first time I've ever done it. And like you said, you've used that too, but independently.
Totally
and we've both independently come up with the same sort of solution
to a problem. It was cool because when we had done it, for those of you familiar, we actually have a Vodcast episode where we talked about this.
Yep.
So more or less we had a dam breach analysis where downstream of the dam there was a lot of infiltration that was available, and we used negative inflow hydrographs to account for that infiltration. What we didn't have is we had no calibration data at all. The only thing we knew is that up to a certain flow level we didn't have any discharge that was arriving downstream. That was our only point of reference. The really cool thing about your study, I think, is that you had, 90 years of calibration data?
Yeah.
And so you were able to take this kind of idea of using negative inflow hydrographs to represent this infiltration and actually calibrate and prove that that's exactly what was happening. And not only that, but it sounds like you had even better data in terms of this much infiltration is leaving at this location and then this location, right? It was kind of more site-specific.
Right. So I had like base flows. So groundwater base, just general flows from I don't even know what event it would be, So I just wanted to look at the difference in magnitude.
Sure.
Of certain because I wanted to see which sink would hold more water.
Right.
Because there are about 12 to 15 sinks along this river. So you can't say all sinks are created equal.
Sure.
You can't just have equal amounts of water going through every single sink. So then we had to really sort of start with these are the base flow values.
Yep.
We're going to start turning knob starting at this point, and then keep on putting negative hydrograph to get certain amount of water.
So each of these withdrawals, these negative hydrographs, were at discrete locations in your system.
Did you have gauges in between? Or did you
so the whole motivation of trying to do the mass balance was so that in the 1D model, we could get those flow change locations, because those drainage area transfer equations that you see in regression report, those aren't going to come in handy when you have all these kind of karst features.
Sure.
And there's no a dam regulation where you can okay, these are regulated flows, so we'll do something about it. So these are just karst features. The only thing that we can really do is take the water out somehow, incrementally, as you were going from upstream to downstream, and then have those features sort of balance out.
Act as calibration points, more or less.
So that's an inverse hydrograph, I think, kind of worked really well.
And so for people who are wondering out there, the RAS users who maybe have not done this before, this is literally drawing a BC line inside of a 2D area at the discrete location where you want to withdraw water. Now, I've actually seen examples of this too, where someone will draw a line longitudinally where you can have a uniform withdrawal along an entire channel reach to simulate a more uniform infiltration over a reach. But you're talking about, I've got these discrete areas, I know where it's happening.
And I have gauges in between to be able to prove it.
To use as my knobs. So I'm going to put just a little small BC line here, another one over here, another one over here, and that's going to be my withdrawal. That's really cool.
I mean, I think if I was running an unsteady model, I would probably have those longitudinal lines, so the timing, I could play around with the timing.
Yes.
But it was a 1D steady model, so all I needed really were flows, the peak flows.
Okay. So this was a 1D model.
Yes.
Okay, so you were using just the lateral inflow hydrograph, but making a negative value for an outflow.
Oh, it's even more different then.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we had a 2D model, like an approximate 2D model for the entire watershed.
Okay.
So I wanted to do just HMS, kind of taking flow out in HMS, but we already had a rain on grid model.
Okay.
So let's just use the rain on grid model to calibrate the entire basin.
Sure.
So the Santa Fe River in Florida, that's the one that we did in detailed.
Okay.
And so that was the detailed model.
Yeah.
And since we didn't want to really worry about floodway in 2D and do all those things, so we're let's do a 1D. So it kind of started as a 1D. I said, it was supposed to be simple 17C analysis with just 1D putting a flow change location in 1D model.
Yep.
That was all it was supposed to be.
And before you knew it, you're presenting a topic at ASFPM conference and on Full Momentum and HEC-RAS Vodcast talking about it. So
I know. But that's basically the evolution of how this happened, like the whole progression of how this project came about.
Well, that's really cool, Ray, and I'm super glad that you came by and that we were able to connect up.
Absolutely.
And talk about a very unique and interesting way of applying RAS to a difficult problem, because like I said before, I think we all agree that's the fun part about RAS, is when you can solve these little puzzles, you can make it do what maybe it's not entirely meant to do, but you've done something creative to make it work for you. So
yeah. No, I really applaud all the people out there that do all kinds of creative things with RAS, because I know we have limitations, but if you really want to, somehow you can make it work in RAS.
Heck
and it's amazing.
Love that message.
You know? It's like Cray did that for the vertical Manning differential. I mean, I hope in the future, we're able to have that functionality.
One of my favorite ones of all time, did you ever hear about the wormhole culverts workaround?
The wormhole culvert? I have not.
Yeah, so in early versions of RAS 2D, you couldn't actually have culverts that spanned multiple cells. It would only go from one cell to the next one. And that's a major problem, because a lot of times, there's a significant distance that they span. And so some guy came up with this idea where they would just do this very long storage area connection that was in the shape of a Z, put the inlet at the culvert at one end of the Z and the outlet on the other end of the Z, and effectively made a wormhole, and was able to get around that limitation.
Wow.
But, of course, now RAS has the ability to jump multiple cells, and so it's not a problem anymore.
See, these are all things that we need to appreciate at the time that they're done, because, our solutions that we came up with might be gone by the time that they come out with the next version. So we need to recognize it and appreciate it for the ingenuity that it is.
Celebrate the
always,
achievements.
Thinking outside the box. I mean, no matter when it is in the future, no matter how great the functionalities are in the future, there will always be a point of, like, where the software don't work for you, and you just have to do something. You need to rig it. You need to really rig. You got to think more outside the box, and I think that's a part of becoming an engineer, right?
Yeah,
like it's just
becoming a good RAS modeler.
Or a good RAS modeler.
Yeah.
So, and that's honestly what I really enjoy about my job. It's just being able to find sort of simple solutions to complex problems.
Yeah.
And
I've heard that before.
That lines up, I think, on our Kleinschmidt line there.
I think that's our motto. So.
No way. Is it?
So anyway, Ray, we really appreciate you coming on today, man. It's been a blast.
It really
been
has.
a great day 2 of ASFPM. Next time we see you all, it'll be recording of day number 3. But yeah, this has been Full Momentum and HEC-RAS Vodcast. If you guys want to find Ray, look him up. He's at Wood Consulting, and it's been a lot of fun. Thanks again, Ray.
Yeah,
Thanks,
I
Ray.
appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
Welcome to Full Momentum and HEC-RAS Vodcast. We are here on day 2 of the ASFPM 2022 National Conference here in Orlando, Florida. And have another interview here. Chris, why don't you introduce our guest?
Yeah, so we're happy to have Mike Hersick here. He works for HNTB in Louisiana, New Orleans. I was just there. It's a fantastic place to go visit. So
Thank you. I'm so glad you visited us.
We can maybe talk a little bit about that coming up here. But Mike, tell us what you do at HNTB.
Thanks. And first off, I'm just glad to be sitting here with these legends of engineering.
All right, here.
Finally,
let me get your payment here. Hang on. Okay,
Thank you. It's only $2. You can afford that. But I'm a senior hydraulic engineer with HNTB, based out of New Orleans office. And I really focus on water resource and civil works practice nationally. And so I'm just excited to find out what we learned today.
Yeah, and you're a RAS modeler, right?
I am. Yeah. I've been a RAS modeler since like 1998.
Yeah, so we were talking last night, and we crossed paths, although this was a long time ago when I was working at HEC.
Yeah.
And you were taking some of the classes there.
The old prospect classes with the red binders, if you remember those.
I do remember those. I still have them.
I know. Yeah. You can't get rid of them.
No, they're still there. And unfortunately, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't remember how poor of an instructor I was back then. I've gotten much better lately, but I was kind of thrown into the fire back in those days, and they just said, hey, go teach this class. And don't mind guys like Mike who knew more than you.
Well, you made an impression. Maybe I don't know what impression you made, but you made one, and I do remember you all these years. So,
Cool.
It is pretty funny to see like how much crossover there is between like HEC-RAS users, you know, within the country. Like, it seems like everybody has a connection that they either work together at one point, or they know, you know, a large portion of the community.
Yeah, it's a small community,
but growing.
I think we have. On the HEC-RAS Facebook page, I think we're over, or almost 7,000, if you can believe that, 7,000 members.
Well, and then, like you were saying, like, you know, HEC-RAS is international now, and you're international now.
Yeah, they use it everywhere.
Yeah, so
almost everywhere. Yeah, so it's a good way to get out and travel the world and see new places. But,
I gotta get one of those gigs. I haven't made it overseas yet.
I just came back from France and was fortunate to teach a class in just outside of Marseille in Aix-en-Provence, and the class was amazing. I was so worried that they wouldn't understand me, and I'd have to.
Parlez-vous français?
No, you need to have Mike there to translate for you.
Je ne parle pas français. Yeah. That's all I know, by the way. So.
That's great. Well, before we get into a little bit more of the background with you, Mike, and your experience with RAS, and maybe a special topic we can touch on. Obviously, today was day 2, a bunch of really cool topics and discussions that were had today. Just want to go down the line and see if there was anything that stuck out to you. It could be something really simple that you learned, conversation that you had with somebody. Chris, anything stick out?
I really enjoyed, and this will come to no surprise to you, Ben, and maybe you, Mike, but I really enjoyed the probabilistic discussion, and I like to see where the thought is and where that's going in floodplain modeling, but really just hydraulic modeling in general, because I honestly think that's the future of the way we do hydraulic modeling, and river modeling is a probabilistic framework. What about you?
No, I totally agree, and I sat through that same session, and this whole idea of a graduated risk approach, and it's really it's going to be conducive once for the current risk, but also future risk. I just think to the fact that, like, you know, the work that we're doing in Louisiana, you know, we're really looking at, you know, synthetic events of a large range that we can first off like quantify, you know, the current frequency distributions for now, but then also use those ranges and all those synthetic events and apply them to future conditions, knowing that there's some uncertainty.
Oh, right.
And it kind of really gives us that a lot more flexibility of how we apply that information, how we evaluate risk. And it was exciting to see that, hey, you know, FEMA is going to go to the graduated risk approach, and we'll see that in maps hopefully in the next decade.
Oh, yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, just the idea of not having like that single black line, right, that says this is where your risk ends, and having an understanding that that's variable, and it changes not only with the data that we have, but it's going to continue to change over time, and having the flexibility to implement that.
It's really not a genuine way to express what we're doing as modelers, you know, to have a binary, you're either in or out of the floodplain, because the reality is there is a lot of uncertainty in what we do. And to brush that over and provide a deterministic result really doesn't acknowledge that uncertainty. No. And so I think it's the better way to go. The problem is it costs a lot of computing power to do. And so we kind of have to get to that point where it's feasible to do, but I think we're close. I think we're getting there.
The other thing I really liked about that topic this morning, what was cool for me, and I'm sure it was cool for you, Chris, is we've seen probabilistic analysis that's been done, but it's always been done in a riverine environment. The discussion this morning was on coastal. And so seeing the same application, the same process, and some of the same results just applied to something totally different, it gave me a little bit of reassurance that, hey, we're not kind of out on it. We're a little bit out on a limb doing probabilistic dam breach analysis and things like that, but that kind of thought process is going to infiltrate its way into all kinds of areas of H&H, which was cool to see.
Well, you know, the probabilistic approach in the coastal environment has been going on for a while. You know, a lot of the mapping and the coastal mapping does rely on that. So I think there's a lot of that bleeding into the riverine, and helping FEMA kind of come to that conclusion and say, hey, you know what, this is working in the coastal environment in the mapping processes, and you know, this could work in the riverine. So, but back to the whole data management thing, you know, that scares me also. Just in terms of the breadth where FEMA wants to go and the level of data that's required, and then managing that information. We have that challenge daily.
Right.
Just running the simulations, and we've kind of succumbed to. We've got to run on virtual platforms.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's the only way we can manage it.
And that's an interesting point, because that also kind of restricts maybe who's going to be able to do this work in the future. Does it become a situation where we're being a little bit restrictive in terms of who has the computational resources to do this work? Right now, a two-person mom and pop shop can do all the FEMA work that's necessary in 10 years from now. I don't know if that's going to be the case. And hopefully they figure out a way to somehow work with folks that don't have those resources to be able to do the work.
Yeah. So, Mike, speaking of coastal modeling, you live in Louisiana.
I do.
You work there. You're comfortable.
And I drink the water, too.
That's another discussion. But what I want to know is not how you drink the water, but how you model it in the transition zone between riverine and coastal. And what are some of the challenges with using HEC-RAS in an environment like that? What have you run into?
So the biggest challenge right now, and just to put things in perspective, a lot of the work that we are doing is at a kind of parish-wise 60 square mile type of models where they cross over from the upland areas, but the upland areas for us are only elevation 10, 15.
Yeah.
And then
those are the mountains.
Those are the mountains. That's the ridge. That's the high ground that we have to live with.
Yeah.
But they quickly descend to the swamps and the wetlands at elevation 0. And those are lakes, and then riglets and bayous and all those such things. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is water moves very, very slowly.
Yeah.
And then when you start getting the coastal impacts and the surge impacts that we know, whether it be, and then there's also high tide, low tide that impacts, so flood levels, tens and tens of miles upstream away from the coastal zone, what we would call the coastal zone. It's where do you draw the boundary?
Yeah.
And then what what hydrograph do you assign?
Yeah.
And given that we're moving more and more towards, in 2D world, pretty much who does a 2D model that's steady, more and more of it's the unsteady simulations.
Right.
What is a reasonable hydrograph to use, whether it be for a synthetic event, and then running it for some of these more extreme historical events and hindcasting is the durations. So we're looking at 14, 20 days duration events.
Wow.
And that's a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
And then debugging, because they'll take hours and hours to run, and go back to debug. But in terms of the actual logistics of the, luckily it's well gauged. So you rely heavily on the gauge information, tidal gauge information, and that to set your boundary.
Right. But what about sensitivity? Because I remember doing some work down in Louisiana, and if you're a little bit off of your end value or some other input, that could make the difference of your boundary being here or a mile away.
Yeah.
It's amazing how flat it is and how that translates to, an extended inundation area.
It's I laugh because roughness is, there's so much subjectivity to it.
Oh, yeah.
And, we do take and I would have to fall to, we have to take a pretty rigorous, calibration validation process to nail it down.
Yeah.
And that is one of the more sensitive buttons we have for the calibration process. And I'm going to leave it at that right now, because that's a wormhole that I may not come out of.
Well, we'll have to have Mike on a special episode where that's all we can focus on.
We just talk about
really
end
dive in depth.
Depth varying end values and the criticality of that, and I'd rather not go there right now.
I hear you.
I'm enjoying myself too much right now.
So maybe after 2 more beers.
Yeah, exactly. Have you been to an ASFPM conference in the past?
This is my first one.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So what went into the decision for you to come here the first time? But there's people out there that maybe are deciding, is it worth going to next year? What would you say to those folks?
And it's actually, I have to say this has been a great conference, and one technically, but then also there's a really good representation by the end user here, which is FEMA, and then the local, governmental entities. They're all here, and they seem to be really engaged, presenting what their challenges are, the success stories. And I found that really refreshing from other engineering firms that I've been to. I mean, I've been doing this for decades, and this is my first time. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. This is like a really a celebration of engineering and just team building. So it's
not your
really
typical
refreshing.
engineering conference either. It's a little bit of a wild side here that I'm sensing.
Yeah, it really is.
Which is kind of fun.
Yeah, I really appreciate too the fact that we have planners and non-technical folks that are here and they're presenting alongside of engineers, because these projects are so vast in terms of what they require and how much effort it takes to be successful. So it's cool to get those other perspectives, have conversations with folks that aren't as technical.
No, I think back to like our session, so we presented with St. Tammany Parish, FEMA, we were a sub to St. Tammany Parish, and then there was also the Compass team, which was a sub to FEMA, and we all presented, and that kind of teamwork, and we're all like, we're all equal, stakeholders in the process, kind of what you're talking about. And it's really, it's nice. It's like, this is the way it should be. So
Yeah. Well, Mike, I have to say, I think you might be the best dressed guy in the conference, and you're making me feel very inadequate. I don't have my coat on. You look really good.
This is my presentation gear.
It's your presentation gear.
Presentation for the podcast or for your actual presentation?
For both.
For the podcast.
Yes.
I mean, this is.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought.
All right.
Cool.
Well, thanks again, Mike, for joining
absolute
us.
Pleasure.
It's been a blast having you on. We'll definitely exchange information, and we'd love to have you on a podcast where we actually maybe open up the software and go through some stuff and see what you're seeing down in Louisiana, because it's a completely different environment to do H&H modeling. When you compare the Bayou in Louisiana to the Northwest.
I'd love to share knowledge as much as possible. You all are a great platform, and I thank you as a user, because it's really helpful. I go to your sites and be like, what's going on? What are they talking about? What happened? So no, thank you all for this opportunity.
Oh, that's great. And next time I'm in New Orleans.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Man, you're going to show me where to go,
and
right?
just plan a lot of just kind of dead time.
Dead time,
or I should say recovery time.
Okay, fair enough.
But you got to put off days in between the class lecture days.
Yes. Exactly. 3 hours class, rest break.
Class 1 day, break 1 day. Class 1 day, break 1 day.
That's healthy.
Yes.
That's good pace.
Yeah,
all right.
I think so.
Cheers to you then.
Well, as everybody can probably hear, conference is packed. People are grabbing drinks. Chris and I don't have a beer, so we need to catch. Chris does have a beer. Okay, I need to catch up with these guys. Cheers. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
All right, welcome to Full Momentum and HEC-RAS Vodcast. Today is day 3 of the ASFPM conference in Orlando, Florida, and we are here with our first interviews of the day. We have Sareda and Vahid, who are joining us today to talk about a really cool project they're going to be presenting on tomorrow. So we weren't going to have the chance to talk with them after the presentation, so we thought we'd bring them on before. And the topic that really interests us is you guys have been doing some really, really cool work with rain-on-grid modeling using RAS 2D. Before we get into the technical topic, though, why don't you guys both introduce yourselves, talk about who you work for, and kind of generally what you do and how that might relate to floodplain management. Sure.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Sareda Kalikawaya. I'm from the Dallas, Texas, and I'm a project director in Atkins, and my background is H&H modeling from 1D, 2D, and I've used different softwares, and I'm more interested in innovations, how to take the next 10, 15 years, how to do the modeling. So that's I'm interested.
And Vahid, what about you?
So I'm a senior engineer with Atkins since 2017. I am a main H&H modeler, supporting the FEMA jobs, and I'm heavily involved in doing the modeling, HEC-RAS, HEC-HMS, regression equations, all kind of tools that we use to support the FEMA projects.
And Vahid reminded me that he was in my class in 2015, right?
Yes.
In upstate New York. And brought back some good memories of that trip out there. So thanks for reminding me on that, Vahid.
My pleasure. Yeah. When I saw you approached to me, I was getting surprised. What's going on? And then I realized that you are interested in this hot topic, rain and grid.
Yeah, that shouldn't be surprising, right? I'm interested in all things RAS, but especially innovative approaches to studying what's happening in a system. So.
Sure. And so it sounds like your guys' project, I'll give maybe a 10,000-foot review, and then you guys can describe it a little more depth and probably more accurately. But it sounded like, based on the description in our conversation, is you wanted to look at how a rain-on-grid fully 2D RAS model would compare in terms of how those, what the resulting flows from that were, to known data, gauge
Yes.
data, as well as the same approach but using HEC-HMS and
Yes.
seeing how those two results. That's something that obviously has been looked at quite a bit
Yes.
since RAS 2D Rain on Grid has come out,
Mhm.
and we've heard a lot of differing opinions and conclusions from that. So why don't you describe a little bit about what you did and what the conclusions from that were?
Yeah. So as I mentioned in our private conversation, we started with the from something very very simple. Because we didn't want to jump deep into the problem where we don't have any idea what's going on. So we started with a very simple watershed. That watershed was gauged watershed. We had information from gauge analysis. So we just wanted to have something at hand when we do the rain and grid, HEC-RAS rain and grid. Then we have some comparison with what was going on in that watershed. So we set up a HEC-RAS rain and grid model and HEC-HMS model, and with the calculated parameter, surprisingly we get better results from HEC-RAS rain and grid, more comparable to the results that we get from the gauge analysis. So we was just thinking probably this HEC-RAS rain and grid has some capability that we need to figure out.
Yeah.
So after we finished that, we were thinking, okay, we deal with lots of project and lots of site that they don't have any gauges.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens in that circumstances? Then we continue and add some complexity to the problem. We switched to another work we did with Atkins. It was a 1D 2D model at the beginning, and what we did was to construct a 2D pure 2D HEC-RAS rain and grid. And with that case, the flow discharges was not the same out of HEC-HMS, rain and grid, 1D 2D model, and even with the effective results in the FEMA publications, we didn't get similar discharges. So we continue to compare the water surface elevations, and surprisingly, the water surface elevations was very comparable between all of these approaches.
Yeah.
And when we look at the mapping, even the mapping for the pure 2D versus the 1D 2D, the mapping was also very comparable.
Wow, interesting.
So what do you think may have caused a similar water surface elevation between the two models, but they're very different flows? What was potentially a reason for that?
I honestly don't know at the moment. We were trying to figure out what's going on because we have a dam in this case, and a bunch of lateral structures.
Mm-hmm.
And with that complexity, it is very surprising to get water surface elevation the same.
Yeah, between the different.
Yeah, between the methods. Yeah, that's a little bit surprising.
Wonder if there's some backwater going on that's causing that, because that can sometimes be a big driver in different flows,
Yes,
same water
yes,
surface.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So it sounds like for the first project case,
Uh-huh.
you had a gauged watershed.
Gauge watershed.
And the RAS 2D outperformed the HMS, which was pretty interesting.
Exactly.
And then for the second case, which was an ungauged watershed,
Mhm.
you had differences in output flow between the different methods, but very, very similar stages.
Exactly.
So what was the overall conclusion that you guys came, in the paper you're going to present or talk about tomorrow? What was kind of the overall conclusion?
One takeaway that I can talk about is that HEC-RAS rain and grid has some potential. We need to figure out what's going on there, and we need to explore that model more.
Oh yeah.
Before coming to some conclusion that okay, these are some instructions about using rain and grid.
Yep.
Because as I mentioned, we had some other project that we did on our own because of out of the curiosity to see what's going on. And one case was in Hawaii, Mapunapuna area. That was very helpful to give us some idea what's going on in that area. we went out to the field a couple of weeks ago, and it was very interesting that people were talking about their stories, and which was very close to what we got from the pluvial modeling.
Yeah, interesting.
That's one thing that we have, and the other thing, I'm just trying to make some comparison between HMS and HEC-RAS rain and grid, and that's we get results in every pixel, in every mesh, not only the flow discharges, but the water surface elevation. I think it is hard, if not possible, in HEC HMS. I'm not sure.
To get pixelated water surface data.
To get the water surface elevation.
Yeah, you would only be able to get it actually in your sinks and reservoirs, right?
Exactly.
HMS, Chris?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And above that, HMS has some dependency on something external, I should say. Like you need to provide some pair data. For the second case, when we were setting up the HMS, we had to come to some pair data for the storage versus discharges, or storage versus elevations, and feed it into the model.
Yeah.
To get the result, which is not something happening for rain and grid. But when we look at the rain and grid and how much time it needs to run fully, HMS is very fast.
Very fast, yeah, very different. So, Sarita, can we ask you, what was your role on this project, and what were your takeaways? What were your thoughts?
Okay, so my role is basically, because we don't want to say which one is better at this point.
Yeah.
So that's the support I'm providing to the team is, let's keep doing this and test it. And so one of the things that we plan on doing is take more projects that we already have and do these comparisons. And one of the things that we already know about the rain on grid is the mapping, like the outputs from the models, which takes it because of the shallow flooding, right? There is a lot of challenges with anything that's less than 3 feet of water. Do we say that it's going to flood, or do we classify it as a low risk and move on? Or what is the how do we even clean the results from a rain on grid, right? And then the other side of the things that he's talking about is, how do we even take, because especially from the RAS outputs of HDF files, what can we do the results so that we don't have to run this many times, but we can still almost like a probabilistic analysis, right?
Sure.
So for calibration.
Yeah. Do you remember how long the models took to run?
Oh, I don't think it's these are
for the simple case. It ran like 10 minutes.
Oh, that's
15 minutes.
That's not too bad.
Not too bad. Yeah. But I remember for the Mapunapuna case, it took a long time. I don't remember exactly how many hours, but I remember one of my colleagues was complaining because at the moment I was not at the office. She has to do that, so she was complaining about the time it needs to be run.
I liked what Sarada said about the challenges of interpreting some of the 2D rain on grid results, and what to do with some of those areas where you have smaller depths that are being displayed as flooded. And that's, I think, a great example of how more detailed results aren't always better. Right? You would think like, more detail in 2D rain on grid is going to be better. It's like, well, sometimes you have these results where if you publish those, you're actually almost making up results potentially, right? You don't know how real this is going to be, and in a way that's what's nice about HMS, right? Is you don't have to decide what to do with those inter results. There's a little, you're just getting that clean output at the end of the model, and so obviously there's a challenge, and there's definitely benefits to doing rain on grid modeling, but there's lessons to be learned about what to do with some of those more complex areas. Yeah,
so one other applications that we started using it, especially from rain on grid, is because we can create a simple model and figure out where are all the flow paths, right? And then start, do we need to do a 1D, 2D, or even a pure 1D with enough cross sections, or break into two different models altogether. One of the things that, again, me looking at the Atkins mapping program helps us at looking from the end user perspective, not This is my take. Not 1D is less accurate, 2D is more accurate, right?
Sure.
Even though, yes, both of them has its advantages, but the application should rely on the end user.
Yeah,
Right.
That's a good, interesting take. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you guys both one last question about ASFPM but before I go there, wanted to ask one more follow-up, Fahid, for folks that maybe are interested in the case study where you had the gauged watershed and RAS-2D seemed to do a better job of replicating the results compared to HMS. Can you briefly describe what type of basin? Was it a small, large basin, and was it very, very steep and mountainous, or was it very, very flat? Just so people kind of have the perspective.
Sure. So as I mentioned, the watershed was very small in there. I remember it was like 2.7 square mile, fully covered by the vegetation, some wetlands. The type of soil was type A, which is very absorbent. So at the outlet we have a smaller portion of the rainfall turning out to be a runoff. It was gauged, so we had the data for that gauge to do the gauge analysis, different methods, and as I mentioned, HEC-RAS rain and grid was producing more comparable result versus the HEC-HMS, which produced like 60 or 70% higher flow discharges.
Wow.
So it was the results for that small watershed before we just switched to some complexity and some complex cases.
And of course, people are going to be wondering things like what N values were you using? More conventional type N values, or did you have to use something very, very high to get that to match? What did you have?
To get the N values, we used the National Land Use Land Cover data. We assigned the N values which we usually use in our model. In our
more conventional numbers,
more conventional,
like,
yes, exactly,
like
exactly,
035s, 05s,
exactly.
065s, somewhere in there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in terms of the steepness of the watershed, I believe it was not very deep. It was not very steep. I mean, it was the whole characteristic of that watershed we were using to produce the results and compare the HEC-HMS and HEC.
Do you remember the size of the cells that you were using? Roughly?
It was the matter of our sensitivity analysis.
Yeah. Okay.
We started with 100 by 100.
Okay.
But then
this is feet,
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And then we reduced it to 50 by 50 feet. But then the results was not, they changed, but. It was not in a dramatic way that HEC-HMS had like 60% higher than.
So it didn't show to be super sensitive to the cell size.
Yeah, super sensitive. Yeah.
And is this both your guys' first time at ASFPM, the national conference, or have you guys both?
For me, yes, but Radha, I think.
I've been doing it for 15 years.
Okay.
15 years.
So
wow.
this will be a good question for both of you then. So for somebody who's been at a lot of these and somebody who it's their first time, what's been your impression of the conference and what's been your favorite part?
So for me, the favorite part is meeting people, especially after COVID, and because it's a family, and even talking with the people that I admire, right? I got an opportunity, so it's a good thing, especially with working with Gary Brunner, right, for a while.
Yeah.
Working with him on the 2D floodway analysis, working with FEMA. So so it's a small family, and at the end we're all use the same softwares, right, and learning from each other.
Yeah.
Right. So.
And what about you, Vicky? What's been your impression of the conference as a first-time attendee?
Yeah. Actually, I attended the local ones, but this is the national one. It is very interesting because some of the topics are very innovative. Like one of our colleagues is going to talk about the big data, which is very interesting to me. So these kind of topics are very, very interesting to me to learn about what kind of activity the other people are doing. So we get some idea of the next generation of modeling and mapping, especially for the FEMA jobs. Yeah, this is the main thing that's just attract me in this conference.
Great. Well, hey, it's fantastic having both of you here. Thank you so much for joining us
My
and
pleasure.
sharing the project with us. I think the work that you guys are doing and others like you who are really kind of cutting edge, doing new things, pushing the limits of the software, testing it out. That's my favorite thing to do with RAS, by the way, is to test it, to see what it can do, to see how it performs. And so I love seeing that kind of stuff. And I hope you keep publishing that and sharing with others what you're finding so we can all do a better job collectively in our modeling. Yeah.
So Sarada, Vahid, thank you guys both again so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. And thanks again.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome to Full Momentum and HEC-RAS Vodcast. And Chris and I are wrapping up here on day 3 of ASFPM.
Yep.
It's been quite a 3 days of conference, technical talks, and then on top of everything, doing an in-person vodcast with you, Chris, which has been a lot of fun. It's been a challenge. We've learned a lot. What are your takeaways from this whole experience?
You're right. It's been a long 3 days. Been very exhausting in a lot of ways, but also fun and exhilarating, getting to talk to a bunch of different people to learn about different ways of applying RAS, specifically in the realm of floodplain modeling. And just getting to have some nice food too every night has been kind of fun. So it's been great. I think this was a fantastic idea. I love how we've been able to give people a platform, an opportunity to share what they know with us, and so that it's a two-way street. They're getting to share what they know, and we're getting to absorb and learn from it.
Yep. Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was it was really cool talking to kind of the legends of the modeling community, like Mark Forrest and Andy that came on. It's also really cool just to pull in people that we had no idea we were going to talk to. They didn't have any idea they were going to be on a vodcast.
Yeah.
And they came on and they did great. They had some great thoughts, and it's like people have said a couple times on the podcast this week, the floodplain management, conference, all the people that are here, our community, and the RAS community here is really strong as well. So that's been really fun to experience, and also just on a technical side of things, learned a lot this week, and looking forward to learning more tomorrow. Unfortunately, our booth has to close down, so we're not able to record any more sessions after tomorrow, but maybe we'll have to have a recap session that we record on the backside where we can talk about last day of stuff. So anything individually, Chris, in terms of one key takeaway that you had from the conference from a technical side of things?
The key takeaway from this conference is, for me anyway, is how many RAS users come to this conference. There's a lot of RAS users out there, and this is a big one for them. So if you are a RAS user and you want to come somewhere, you want to go to a conference where you can mingle with other RAS users and learn, see some really great presentations, I think this is a good one to go to. They're everywhere, and I was able to meet up with people that I haven't seen in over a decade. Maybe they were in a class of mine or worked on a project together, and so it's a really great way to reconnect, see old people, meet new people, and just talk about HEC-RAS and learn new things.
Yeah, I think, the goal is for us to be able to do this kind of thing in the future. I don't know if it's going to be an annual thing or if it's going to be a biannual thing. I don't know if it's going to be at this conference or something else, but it's been a lot of fun. And if you have feedback for where you would like to see us do one of these in the future at a different conference or a different date, please comment and let us know what that would be. And we'll make sure to give everybody maybe even more heads up next time about where we're going to be doing these live, because again, it'd be really cool to bring in people that heard about us attending the vodcast or attending the conference on the vodcast and be able to come on to the vodcast themselves and talk about stuff. So anyway, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'd love to turn this camera around so that we could show you all the people out there and all the people walking by going, what are these weirdos doing? And what are they talking about? And I also want to give a big thank you to Taylor, who's sitting over here next to us.
Shouts to Taylor.
She's waving. Do you want to come on and say hi, Taylor? She says no, but she's done a great job for us and helping to keep things set up and taking care of the booth and everything. So thank you, Taylor.
Yeah, and last thing before we sign off, I just want to thank ASFPM. Obviously, this is kind of a new thing that recording a podcast from a conference. Can't imagine that's happened very often, and they welcomed us with open arms, kind of allowed us to set up and do this and bring on people and even interview some of the people at ASFPM. So thank you for everybody at ASFPM that allowed us to do this, and hopefully everybody enjoys it. So
I think they will.
Awesome.
Yeah, this has been fun, Ben.
Yeah, well, this has been Full Momentum and HEC-RAS Vodcast, signing off from ASFPM 2022. Thanks.